Hi, I'm Patrick LeBlond. I'm a professor at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs at the University of Ottawa. I'm also a member of the governing board of the European Community Studies Association of Canada. And today I want to address some of the risks that have been associated with the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement that is currently being negotiated between Canada and the European Union. The first one, the first risk that has been mentioned, especially in the media, is the fact that we have a trade deficit here in Canada with the European Union, which means that we import more than we export to them. And the calculations, economic calculations, should such an agreement be ratified, would be that this trade deficit would likely continue. I mean, both our exports and imports would increase. And then many have indicated that this would likely lead to a loss of jobs. But this is, in my mind and in my understanding of how the world economy functions, a biased way of looking at things and a very limited way of looking at things, because one has to look at the entire trade pattern of the Canadian economy. So if it means that we have a trade deficit with the European Union because we're importing, high quality machinery or, pharmaceutical goods, things that are beneficial to the Canadian economy and the Canadian people, and then that means that we are more productive when it comes to exporting vis-a-vis the United States or other countries, let's say in Asia, then that's actually good. So one has to look at sort of what is called the global value chain of businesses. So where do they get their inputs? Where do they send their products? So just to look at on a bilateral level, and then just assume that that's because we import more than we export, automatically it means a loss of jobs, is to have a very limited and truncated view of the Canadian economy and the world economy in which we find ourselves. So that's the first part. To give an example, China, of course, has a trade surplus with Canada, with Europe, with the United States, but it has a trade deficit with countries like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. Does that mean that they're losing jobs into these countries, whereas they're gaining jobs because they're exporting to the Western world? No. In fact, it shows that they're importing high-value components into China to assemble them and create computers, iPads, iPhones, cameras, all these electronic goods that are then exported to Western markets. So in that sense, really one has to look at the entire picture. And if the CETA makes that we can do better business, be more competitive internationally, then that is a good thing. So just to look at the kind of export-import is very limited. So that's the first risk that has been identified. Another risk or fear, if you want, that has been identified with CETA is the fact that municipalities now would no longer be able to discriminate against, let's say, European firms when it comes to public procurement. So, contracts for goods, for services, construction, these kinds of things, they could not favor Canadian firms vis-a-vis European firms in the context of CETA. Well, that is true to a large extent, except that there would still be thresholds of, the talk is that anything below $300,000 could still be, in a way, done in a discriminatory way in favor of Canadian firms. So, and because a large number of the contracts for services and goods that municipalities and municipal governments have out there are relatively small, so it would not have such a big impact for small and medium-sized businesses in Canada. When we're talking about big infrastructure contracts, well, the threshold will be 1.5 million. So again, probably small and medium-sized businesses in Canada would not be so much affected. So what we're really talking here is for the big contracts when we're talking about building a subway or extending some kind of rail line for commuter trains. That's where we could appeal, and use the expertise and knowledge of European firms, but they would have to compete in the same way with Canadian firms. So it's not even guaranteed that they would win the contracts, but at least it would create more competition. Might mean that prices would be lower, the quality might be higher, and in a way force us to up our games. So we should not see competition necessarily as always leading to a loss of job, and therefore that we should shut ourselves off from the rest of the world. In fact, competition is good, and if it means that then Canadian firms will be more competitive, more productive, and able to then benefit from access to the European market in terms of public procurement, which is a huge market of $1 trillion. So we have to be very careful with this idea that as soon as we mean more competition, we open our borders, then it creates a loss of jobs. Maybe some firms will be less competitive as a result, but then they will have to just do a better job. We should not forget also that a lot of the European firms that are here and that are already here, they already hire and employ Canadians and do business with Canadian firms. So on many of these contracts, even if a new European firm were to come, still a lot of the money that they would spend would be here in Canada with Canadian firms and Canadian employees. They would not necessarily bring everything from Europe because that would be too costly. So I think, again, the fear that opening up public procurement to European firms would mean a loss of sovereignty or a loss of jobs, I think is much more overplayed and overdone than the reality is likely to be. One last thing is that if European firms come here and they do business with Canadian firms on a public contract, let's say to build a hospital, well, that relationship with that Canadian firm then might be used somewhere else where they're going to build, another hospital, another part of the world. So all of a sudden, Canadian firms become integrated in sort of the global production chain or value chain of these big multinational companies, because they say, hey, we have a great Canadian company to whom we can do business, and then some other part of that company will want to do business with that Canadian company. So again, we should see the benefits that might come from this. So overall, the fear that CETA would mean loss of jobs, lower standards, because all of a sudden we would have to allow any European firm to do business is untrue. I mean, we would retain still our control over the quality of the goods and services that we want. When it comes to the professions, there's no lowering of standards. We would still say, well, if you want to provide healthcare services, if we decide that we would allow European firms to do that, they would still have to abide by Canadian standards. So I think those fears that we would really lose our sovereignty are much overdone. Thank you.